The night was still when the fire began. It started as a flicker in the old warehouse on the edge of town, a soft orange pulse against the dark horizon. By the time anyone noticed, it was already roaring, licking at the rafters, painting the sky in shades of gold and black. But long before the flames, before the smoke and the screams, there had been a lie, a single, poisonous sentence that set everything in motion. Ethan Cole and Marcus Reed had been friends since they were 12. They'd grown up side by side in a small town where everyone knew each other's secrets, or thought they did. They played on the same high school team, worked the same summer jobs, and swore they'd always have each other's backs. But time has a way of testing promises, and friendship can be as fragile as glass when jealousy creeps in. When Ethan got the promotion that Marcus wanted, things began to shift. It was subtle at first, a little distance, a little coldness in Marcus's tone. Then came the rumors. Ethan didn't think much of them at first. Whispers that he'd bribed his way into the job, that he'd betrayed their boss, that he'd stolen confidential data. The kind of talk small towns love to chew on. But the rumor grew teeth, and before long, it wasn't just talk. It was accusation. It was evidence, planted, manipulated, real enough to destroy a man's life. Marcus had made sure of it. He had forged the emails, altered the numbers, and handed them over to the authorities with a performance so convincing it would have earned him an Oscar. Ethan was fired, blacklisted, and shamed. Overnight, the man who had built everything from nothing became a ghost, broke, bitter, and burning with a question he couldn't shake. Why? The answer came weeks later when he overheard Marcus bragging about it in a bar. It wasn't just jealousy. It was revenge for something Ethan didn't even remember. A girl, a moment, a misunderstanding from years ago that Marcus had never let go. Ethan left the bar that night with his fists clenched and his jaw tight, the truth echoing in his skull. He didn't confront Marcus. Not then. Not yet. For months, Ethan disappeared from sight. He sold his car, took odd jobs, and lived out of a motel on the outskirts of town. To the world, he was done, another man broken by his own mistakes. But behind that silence, something darker was taking shape. He watched Marcus's routines, followed him, learned the rhythm of his life, when he left, where he went, who he met. Revenge didn't come easy. It had to be earned, crafted, perfected. On a cold Friday night, Ethan finally made his move. He waited until Marcus was inside the warehouse, his latest business venture, storing auto parts for the town's mechanics. The place was isolated, a perfect stage. Ethan slipped inside, carrying 2 cans of gasoline and a lighter that had belonged to Marcus once, a gift from better days. He poured the fuel carefully, tracing the edges of the room like an artist outlining his masterpiece. Then he waited. When Marcus noticed him, he didn't look afraid, just surprised. "Ethan," he said, half laughing, half uneasy. "What are you doing here?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He just looked at him, really looked at him, the way you study a stranger who used to be your reflection. "You ruined me," Ethan said quietly. "And for what?" Marcus opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. He tried to spin it, to twist the story again, but this time there was no one left to believe him. The smell of gasoline filled the air. Ethan struck the lighter. For a moment, neither man moved. The tiny flame danced between them, and in it, they saw everything that had been lost: trust, youth, laughter. Marcus lunged, shouting something Ethan never heard. The lighter dropped. The flame met the fumes, and the world exploded in heat and sound. When the fire trucks arrived, the building was an inferno. They found Marcus's body near the door, Ethan's near the back. Both charred, unrecognizable, locked forever in the story they had written together. The town called it an accident. The police wrote it off as a tragic confrontation gone wrong. But those who knew them whispered something else. They said it was betrayal that started the fire, not gasoline, not rage, but the slow burn of friendship turned sour. And in the end, it consumed them both. Long after the ashes cooled, the warehouse stood as a blackened skeleton on the edge of town. The wind howled through its hollow ribs, carrying the faint scent of smoke, and if you listened closely, on certain nights, You could almost hear two voices in the dark. One asking why, and the other whispering because. The fire should have been the end of it, a final chapter closed in smoke and silence. But the thing about small towns is that stories never really die, they just change shape. They linger in whispers, in half-remembered details, in the glances exchanged by people who swear they've moved on. And in the months after the warehouse burned, the town of Brenton learned that some ghosts don't fade, they wait. The investigation went on longer than anyone expected. The coroner's report listed Ethan and Marcus both dead from smoke inhalation and burns too severe for identification. But the fire marshal noticed something odd. The accelerant pattern wasn't random. It had been deliberate, controlled, as if whoever lit it knew exactly what they were doing. The police shrugged it off. Two desperate men, a confrontation gone too far. But Detective Laura Hayes didn't. She'd known Ethan back when he was a bright, quiet kid who fixed cars after school and saved every dollar for college. He wasn't the type to kill, she said. Not without reason. Still, reason didn't change the ending. The warehouse became a scar on the town's edge, fenced off, silent, forgotten. Grass grew through the cracks in the concrete, the smell of char never quite leaving. But for those who remembered Ethan and Marcus, the stories still flickered like a dying flame, haunting every conversation about loyalty and loss. 6 months later, someone broke into the police evidence locker. No money was stolen, no drugs, no weapons, just a single USB drive, one that had been found in Ethan's motel room after his death. On it were documents, bank statements, screenshots, a recorded voicemail. It wasn't hard to guess who took it. Someone wanted the truth buried again. The voicemail was short, but it was everything. Marcus's voice, panicked and breathless, confessing that he'd framed Ethan to save himself from an embezzlement charge. "He'll forgive me," Marcus had said. "He always does." Forgiveness. That word hung over everything. Maybe Ethan had come that night hoping for it. Maybe he hadn't planned to start the fire at all. Maybe it was Marcus, desperate, cornered, who knocked over the can in a struggle. No one would ever know. But truth, like smoke, has a way of seeping through cracks. Years passed and the town moved on. New businesses opened. New scandals replaced old ones. But the warehouse stayed. It became a place teenagers dared each other to visit, a symbol of what betrayal costs. The walls were blackened and crumbling, the air still thick with the ghosts of two men who had once called each other brother. One evening, a storm rolled in, rain heavy, wind slicing through the broken windows. Lightning flashed, illuminating a figure standing near the ruins. He wore a hood, his face hidden, holding something small in his hand, a silver lighter engraved with the initials MR. The same lighter Ethan had used. The man knelt, placed it on the charred floor, and whispered, "Now it's done." The next morning, when the rain cleared, the lighter was gone. Only a faint boot print remained, leading away from the wreckage and vanishing into the mud. People still talk about that night, about the stranger who visited the ruins, about how sometimes when the wind picks up, you can still smell smoke even after all these years. Some say it's Ethan's ghost. Others say Marcus never really died, that he escaped, burned but alive, living somewhere under another name, waiting for the right moment to make peace with what he did. But those who were closest to them, the ones who knew the sound of their laughter, the weight of their friendship, believe something simpler. They say the fire was never meant to kill, it was meant to cleanse. That in the end, both men burned not from hate, but from the unbearable weight of what betrayal does to the soul. And so the town of Brenton learned its hardest lesson, that lies don't just destroy the person they're aimed at. They burn through everything, trust, love, even memory, until all that's left is smoke, rising quietly into the night, carrying the last trace of what once was. 10 years after the warehouse fire, the story had settled into legend. Brenton had grown a little, a few new homes, a new shopping plaza, a sense of progress that tried to erase what had come before. People didn't talk about Ethan and Marcus anymore, not in the open. Their names had become something like a curse, 2 lives burned away by pride, a reminder whispered to children about the danger of anger and deceit. But for Detective Laura Hayes, it never sat right. The official report was too neat, too tidy, an open and shut case closed with the comfort of certainty. She had seen the remains herself. 2 bodies, both burned beyond recognition, but one had been found closer to the window, as if he had tried to escape. The other was found near the center of the blaze, where the accelerant had been thickest. The autopsy listed both as male, but in truth, the second one had never been confirmed as Ethan Cole. That detail haunted her. It was a quiet spring afternoon when she got a call from a small-town reporter named Owen Cross. He'd been digging into old cases for a book, Local Tragedies, Forgotten Crimes. "Detective Hayes," he said, "you might want to see this." He met her at the old warehouse site. Most of it had collapsed by then, the steel beams rusted, the walls crumbling into the dirt. But Owen had something in his hand, a photograph. It showed a man standing near a dock on the outskirts of another town, taken just a few weeks earlier. The man was older, his hair thinner, his face weathered. But the eyes, they were unmistakable. It was Ethan Cole. Laura stared at the photo, the years folding in on themselves. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Owen hesitated. "Someone mailed it to the paper." No note. Just the photo and one line written on the back, "He never burned." That night, Laura couldn't sleep. The idea twisted in her mind. What if Ethan had survived? What if he'd let the world believe he was dead? And most haunting of all, why come back now? The next week, she drove to the coastal town where the photo had been taken. It was small, quiet, the kind of place where strangers stood out. She showed the picture to locals, asking if they'd seen him. Most shook their heads. One old fisherman paused, though, squinting at the photo. "Yeah," he said slowly. "He rents the old cabin near the cliffs. Keeps to himself. Comes into town for supplies every few weeks." Laura's pulse quickened. She drove out there at sunset, the road winding through salt-stained trees and fog. The cabin sat alone on the edge of a cliff, overlooking a restless gray sea. Smoke drifted from the chimney, a thin, familiar line curling into the sky. She stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel under her boots breaking the silence. The door creaked open before she reached it. Ethan stood there. He looked older, but not defeated. His eyes, those calm, steady eyes, held a strange peace. "I wondered how long it would take," he said softly. "You always were the only one who looked too closely." Laura didn't speak at first. She just studied him, this ghost made flesh. "They buried you," she said. "They buried both of you." He nodded. "That was the idea." "Marcus?" she asked. A shadow passed over Ethan's face. He stepped aside, motioning her in. The cabin was sparse. One chair, a table, a bed, and a wall lined with old photographs. Some were of Brenton, some of Marcus. Others she couldn't place. "He didn't die in the fire," Ethan said. "Not at first." Laura felt the air tighten around her. "I pulled him out," Ethan continued, his voice low. "He was alive. Barely. I couldn't just let him burn, even after what he'd done. I dragged him outside. But he begged me not to call for help. Said he couldn't face what he'd done. That the fire would cleanse it. He made me promise to disappear. To let them think we both died." "Why?" she whispered. "Because he couldn't live with what he'd done," Ethan said. "And I couldn't live with what I almost did. We were both guilty, just in different ways. I didn't kill him, detective. He killed himself long before that night." Silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire in the stove. Ethan turned to the window, looking out over the crashing waves. "I've spent 10 years trying to forgive him, trying to forgive myself. But you can't burn away the past. It clings." Laura studied him for a long time. He wasn't dangerous. Just tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying too much truth. She could arrest him, reopen the case, expose everything. But what would that change? Instead, she said quietly, "The world thinks you're dead. Maybe it's better that way." He smiled faintly, the first trace of warmth she'd seen. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." She left before dawn, her tires cutting through the mist. When she glanced in the rearview mirror, the cabin was already fading into the fog, as if it had never been there. A week later, a package arrived at the Brenton police station. Inside was the silver lighter, Marcus's initials still engraved on its side, and a note written in steady handwriting. Some fires never die. They just find new air. The lighter now sits in the evidence room, locked away, cold and harmless. But every few years, when the wind turns toward the coast, someone in Brenton swears they see smoke rising again from the cliffs. And the legend of the Burned Betrayal continues, not as a story of murder, but as one of friendship twisted by lies, of guilt that refused to die, and of a man who vanished into the ashes only to become the ghost of his own redemption.